Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I went off to Rumble and made a video, and now I'm back to you guys. The mainstream. Of course, we're not mainstream, are we? I thought today we would just simply recap a bunch of conspiracies that have flown around for 10 years, 20 years, and review them and see if we still believe that they exist and see if we think they're psyops and what the perhaps repercussions are. Let me just tell you that if you are the victim of a psyop, which could be a conspiracy that is absolutely, positively untrue, what they are trying to do is to get you to bubble up to the top. And that's twofold. An open-minded person and a gullible person. They're two different things, but you could be both. But if you're innocent and a good-hearted person, you have followed the ways of what you believe to be common law, do no harm, i.e. God. God's the most fundamental rule. You might find yourself both open-minded and gullible. So I don't want me saying that to you to be construed as an attack of any kind. You know, the boy who called wolf was a little bastard, the little Aesop fable. What they were trying to tell you was there were individuals who had corrupted minds, and that the village that would come to his aid and find out that he was lying, well, they were all good people like you. It's the little bastard, little narcissist who needed all the attention, who was polluting the world. It was like invention of a lie, right? Well, there weren't any lies until there was a lie. And then it became an art, didn't it? So if I talk about something that you believe 100%, and I differ with you, it's important that you don't feel like I'm sitting here attacking you. If anything, I'm trying to keep you on a track that is not a psyop. And that's 100% true. There's this psychosis that people have been getting for I don't know how long, maybe forever. But it has to do with, institutionalized knowledge. When you go to a university, go to a school, when you sit in a group of people and they teach you things and it seems to differ with, your previous understanding of how the world works, or it's simply the certified means by which things happen, some of it will be true mathematically and some of it will not be true. The big deal there is that it gets you to subdivide from everyone else who doesn't know that information. It makes you feel superior. And that's a formalized methodology of that kind of bizarre haves and have-nots thing, right? But then there's one that's grown up organically since the internet's been available, which is that you are able to educate yourself on things. Legitimately educate yourself on cures to cancer and all kinds of wild stuff. You can see these things actually occur. But when it comes, once they found out that we existed, that we were self-educating, they said, wow, we can create the entire evidence tree out there on the internet and then suggest something is quite the opposite of what it is, then they will end up finding all the stuff that we have inserted. So let's get into it. I'm just going to freestyle the ones that keep coming up in my world. I'm going to go for a very intense one for people. And again, let me remind you, I went down your path and I came out of it. I don't consider myself to be superior to you in any way, shape, or form. And I respect beyond your wildest fathoms your willingness to also entertain this theory, which is that the earth is flat and it's not round. The gist of the entire conspiracy was that it is flat because there's so much biblical knowledge, claims of that's the shape it was, and it goes into all the different religions. And that the Jesuit priests, the Darwinists, they all wanted you to believe it's round to subtract God from your life. I think if you're truly a wise person, you will see God in a puddle of mud. I mean, you will see God when you look at your children's faces. You will. God doesn't disappear. God simply becomes revealed. You know, Graham Hancock had the book called The Fingerprints of God. And it's a thesis basically on a lot of Egyptology. And I will tell you that is, I'm sure he didn't invent that phrase, but that's one of the greatest phrases you can hold in your heart when you are discovering things about the universe through a scientific, i.e. mathematical realm, where you can simply do the math and it always pans out. The cause and effect that creates the math, well, that can be debated, right? I now wholeheartedly believe that the flat earth conspiracy is the 2008 paper that we got out of an intelligence agency that basically outlined that they were going to create this conspiracy, which took them 7 years to advance through the Eric Dubé conversation. A gentleman, I think by the name of Will Duffy, he took a bunch of folks down to, apparently, the South Pole and had them watch the sun go in a 24-hour cycle down there, just like it does in Russia, Alaska, anything in the northern hemisphere. And that was the big debate, that if it was a disk, you would only have the normal 24-hour sun cycle. But the misnomer is that you have to be in the South Pole to accomplish this. We are acting so incredibly stupid in the terms of scientific analysis of this theory. This theory drives people crazy. We have members of this channel that have tried to purchase some sort of gyroscopes they could put it in their lap during a plane trip from, say, northern hemisphere to the equator to see if, the offset of the precession of the gyroscope actually occurs, because there was a British pilot that got on the BBC and said, man, I've been flying from England to Cairo my entire life. And he goes, there's no precession, which means they're on a flat plane, because if you spin a gyroscope to match London and then you fly all the way to Cairo, it should be wonky because it'll still be level to Cairo or level to London's globe Earth. But he says there's no precession. Now, I did recently talk to a friend of mine who's a fairly decent expert in gyroscopes. And he said, look, it does level out to where you are, but you have to stay there for a little while. And then it will actually, over time, level out to wherever you are. It's just a natural process. But he says it goes really slow. But what was this Will Duffy thing? Will Duffy never believed it was flat. He believed it was round. Well, he said you have to be in the South Pole to see this sun come and go, because it's going in this circle, right? On the outer realm of the disk, the outer diameter of the disk. Okay, let's just apply a little bit of science here. South America is probably one of the only continents that goes nearly to the South Pole naturally. And every single region in the world has cams that you can watch, right? Traffic cams, people's cams, like the public cams that you could just dial into down there. Usually traffic cams are on the top of a skyscraper or something the Weather Channel might broadcast while they're trying to talk about LA traffic or whatever. Well, if it is truly a flat Earth, then the sun would come and go from that continent down there. And you would be able to see, just from the tip of South America, any cam that's publicly available. Just watch it. And just come back and watch it 12 hours later, and come back and watch it 12 hours later, and it should be flickering in daylight to nighttime if you're truly on a flat Earth. But if you are on a globe, then it should be down there pretty bright, just like Alaska. It doesn't go completely dark, and it doesn't get completely light when it's supposed to be nighttime. It stays bright most of the time. So just do that little experiment. You don't have to spend $50,000 to go down to the South Pole to prove it. But what's really, really strange is there's a lot of very wealthy people, or a lot of influential people like Eric Dubé. If Eric Dubé wanted to prove his point, and I have respect for the way he does it, but if he is a PSYOP shill that has been literally hired to put this out, and then he moves way out of America to make sure no one can get a hold of him physically, is he the enemy or is he the friend? You decide. I don't think anyone lost a child due to believing it was flat, right? But he could easily post a message and say, I have a GoFundMe. I need $30,000 to go down to the South Pole to prove that the sun does not exist down there in a 24-hour light cycle. He could get it. A friend of mine, who's again one of my authorities on geology for screenwriting, she went down there. She sat in my backyard for months and months, probably about a year before she had to move inland. And she said, look, I spent 2 weeks there and it was bright constantly. I lived in a black tent. It was very disorienting. What, is she lying to me? She came into this lounge and I met her with a bunch of her other friends, and she says she was a geologist and I had a screenplay that really needed to know, for science fiction reasons, geology. And we just became friends, and we're still friends to this day. Okay. What, did the CIA put that person in my life to make sure I heard this little story? No. Okay. So, go do that little experiment and you'll find out, as the shape of a bubble in water is proof that water bends when it's under a pressurized system, is the exact same thing the earth has, right? I'm not trying to offend you, man. I'm trying to get you hip to God's fingerprints. The only thing is that, if you're a child and someone says oxygen exists in the room, you may deny it because you can't see it. But as you get older, you realize, okay, I'm taking breaths, there's oxygen. And if you've ever had oxygen removed from the container that you're in, you will definitely believe there's oxygen. If I said to you, okay, black space, even though it doesn't vibrate at the frequency of photons, so that you see like a room on, the universe is not a room that's just lit, right? If you were captured like a Twilight Zone by a little girl and put in her little Beetlejuice, nativity scene, you would feel like you're in the real world and everything would be bright because it's her bedroom. Well, we don't see that when we look out into space, do we? We see blackness. I'm not the NASA no star blackness because it's all inside of a studio, but real, Milky Way stars and all that good stuff. But you have to understand there's still a massive pressure system out there. It is more massive than you can conceive, but ether does not create light frequencies until it slows down to the speed by which you see a lightning bolt, which we call plasma. That's the first time you see ether. Outside of that, it's this incredible force, which it in itself will actually yield a lot of the technologies that we'll talk about when we come to 0 point energy systems and anti-gravity. So I put forth to the flat earthers, get the cams from South America, and I mean go all the way to the tip. Use Google Maps to figure out what those countries are, and then start a new search and look up cameras that are traffic cameras and what have you, and just, again, put your computer on record. There's 1,000 free video recording, monitor recording things. Turn your screensaver off and just record your screen. Go to work, go to bed, go to work, go to bed, and then check it. Play it at like 10x and see if the sun truly vanishes. And then you will prove that it's either flat or round. But why would they do this in the first place? They want you to surface to the top as potentially a religious person, which they'll call fanatic, right? They don't want you to believe in God. They want you to believe in them. They're trying to divorce your belief in religion. The Russian guy, I forget his name, that came to America, defected and said, look, we've been trying to take over your country and we're done. The 7 steps to take over America are complete. And with tomorrow being inauguration day, I would definitely tell you that save that one individual, 45 and 47, he was right. They were done. And this dude comes over here in 84, man. But he said religion was the one thing they could use to manipulate you, as long as they could manipulate the church itself and its objectives and its reasoning to you. It's a weird thing when you go into a Christian church here in America. They will profess that Jews killed Jesus, but in their pamphlets, they want you to send money to Israel to save Israeli people. Well, man, you killed my God, but I'm supposed to give you my hard-earned money? That's a little weird. Oh, but because there's passages written in a book that says they're the chosen people. And only 20% of them will ever tell you that they're the chosen people. Whatever, right? But this ether thing is huge. They created the absolute fraud called the Michelson experiment. Which, again, if you understand what ether is, you will absolutely laugh in the face of anyone who throws this at your face and says, this is the most incredibly scientifically accurate experiment ever. It was the most fraudulent experiment in scientific history. If you look at what their entire objective was in the experiment, you realize that they don't understand what ether is. They were trying to control ether's exposure into sensors through a piping system. It absolutely cannot be controlled with the apparatus that they actually put in place. So there's no controlling ether with anything that they did. It would be like saying, just so you know, the Michelson experiment in an analogy would be to say, I'm going to jump in a pool naked and I'm going to get wet. Then I'm going to put cloth clothing on and I'm going to jump in the pool. And if ether exists, I shouldn't get wet because I put on a protective layer of clothing. When the layer of clothing itself is just as permeable as anything, and obviously you get wet. They totally deliberately created this fake experiment in history so that you would let go of ether ever existing, the smallest particle in the universe that has no attribute. Its only designation is when it flows in a particular way. In association with other ether, we start giving it a designation. That's it. We start calling it things. And your analogy that I've said several times on the show, so you fill it up, you pull the plug, it starts doing the little tornado vortex thing, and your parent walks up and says, what is that? And you, being an astute scientific student, let's just say, well, it's a tornado. Or if you're really scientific, you say it's a vortex. And your parent says, no, it's just water. And of course, you look at your parent. Even as a child, you go, yeah, I know it's water, but the way it's behaving is what I am, which is causing me to use a different word. It's a tornado. It's a vortex. The water is ether, and the way it behaves makes you call it a vortex, a torus. Upper constructs would be atoms. The way it vibrates in the universe would make you say it's light. We are all made of ether. Everything in the universe is made of ether, and I mean everything. The only thing that we have not really attempted to resolve is the infinite micro, because there's definitely suggestions that mathematics and all energy goes down into the infinitely small as well as the infinitely large. How big an actual ethereal particle is and how it behaves specifically has probably not been discerned and probably can't be discerned with our current physical form that we have today. We would have to have incredible instruments and probably, honestly, an AI to think about this, but it'll all come back to the very same thing. A particle of no attribute that's most likely spherical, because when you look at the natural shape of things in the universe, it all bounces to a sphere. And again, it's all things bouncing off the fundamental thing that gives it its shape. If the ethereal particle was a cube, then everything would be cubic, right? The world would be cubic. The earth would be cube. The moon and the sun would be a cube. But because that fundamental particle is a sphere, and because when it echoes and bounces off itself and creates higher constructs of matter and energy, you get spheres, okay? When Eric Dubay says water doesn't bend, hold a carbonated drink up to his face and go, what do you call these little round things inside the drink? And don't let him try to twist the words. The guy is an absolute genius in hanging on to a conspiracy, and I think he's got a team behind him, and I think he is a shill. I honestly do. That's why he's in the middle of nowhere, so you can't walk up to him in San Francisco and say, we're gonna have a conversation. I got a video camera, right? He keeps way out of the way. He'll only do shows with people who believe, right? It's a gimmick. I don't like people misleading people. Again, I'll just repeat, when I became an instructor by the age of 24, my whole family's full of teachers and doctors and whatever. They told me, look, when you teach another person something, you have the greatest responsibility in the eyes of God not to manipulate them. So anyone who's literally willing to miseducate people about something, I don't know if there's a higher level of sin. You know, you're totally putting them on the wrong path their entire life. Now, if it's a matter of life and death, well, we might be able to debate that a fib to keep them out of death, which is only a human problem, might be worthwhile, but if you're creating blasphemy at the same exact time that you're trying to protect someone from death, I think you're doing them a disservice. I don't think we're talking about anything that's that intense. So let's segue from this ethereal kind of relational segue into a 0-point energy system and how energy works in general, right? All of you have lit something on fire in your lifetime, from either a match, which has a chemical compound on the end, which is obviously created such that if a certain level of friction happens, a chain reaction happens and all that chemical burns off, the red part of the match burns off, or the black part, or whatever kind of match you have. And then we hope, as a match lighter, that it's going to trickle down into the wood, which has also got a combustible level threshold of heat, and we can hang on to that match for a little while. You watch a bunch of old movies, these old guys light cigarettes with matches all the time. Obviously, you know, the Westerns where they light it on their face and stuff and off their boot and all that stuff. You've seen it. Well, it's that reaction that you need to pay attention to. It's actually more interesting when you light a newspaper on fire, a piece of paper on fire. What you're actually doing is you're introducing a stimulant. This mass and energy, which is nothing more than a sort of an orbital current of atoms that makes paper happen, right? That makes wood happen, that makes anything that's flammable occur. You're creating a chain reaction of unraveling is what you're doing with energy. So you light a match, you got the fire due to a chemical compound on the end of the match, and then you are lighting the paper on fire, which starts a cascade of reaction. And it can't stop unless you mute the reaction with your finger or water or something else that has more inertia than the actual reaction that's naturally happening on the surface of that paper. So what would be a theory of a 0-point energy system of any kind? You have to pick a material that has got something flammable that's either in it or it's just straight flammable material, or you're going to go upper construct and you're going to get into things like electrons, actual electricity. Because you either burn something that maybe boils water, spins a turbine and gives you AC power, or you're going to use nuclear isotopes to boil the water through friction, which will also spin a turbine, give you AC power. Or in a weird, old 1800s way, you have a log oven. You might put something in there as a starter, maybe a fuel like kerosene, very low combustion threshold, which is basically jet fuel. Or maybe that gets the log started. You have heat in your house. But why do we put a log on a log? Why do we take a cigarette and light another cigarette with it? Because you're transferring that chain reaction that's happening either fast or slow, and you're giving it to another object that will react. As long as you don't wait too long, it'll react and it'll light the cigarette, it'll light the other log. And you're creating an unraveling. When the log unravels, what happens to the log? The log turns into this white carbon, oxidized carbon, which is, where you get the white log, you get ash. The surface of the moon is nothing more than a gigantic ball of ash. That's why it looks like ash. How about that? How about that little mystery, right? Water is H2O. So it's H2O. H to the power of 2O. 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. That's water. Okay, what Stan Myers, the inventor in the 1990s, who created a water fracturing engine that ran on tap water. You could put tap water in your car, never have hydrogen in your car stored, and you'd run that tap water all the way to the spark plug and he'd fracture it. The genius of what he did was that the fracturing mechanism to knock that hydrogen off the oxygen was 75% of the pressure that it took to push a piston down. The other 25% was combusting the hydrogen that broke away from the water. When the valve opened up, oxygen came in, oxygen and hydrogen naturally explode, boom. Piston goes down. It was probably 10 years after he died before anyone could figure out his obfuscated schematics to know what the hell he was doing. Very important. So what are these 0-point energy systems? Well, all you have to do when you think about energy, if you study a little bit of electronics or a whole lot of electronics, or you're an electronic engineer, right? You know that your whole discussion about what electricity is electrons. Now, if you're not a scientific person, what you do is you think about the universe as a bunch of currents in water, except they're in 3 dimensions. It's not like the currents in a river, which turn into these little tornado vortexes. You take out gravity completely from the model, and you get spheres. You get toruses. Toruses are nothing more than donuts, right? Well, that creates an orbit. That also creates the ricochet of free-flowing ethereal particles that are slamming into this barrier, which is like basically getting kicked out because the density of the orbits that make up this torus, you can't get through it. It bumps into something else and bounces back. Well, the torus is magnetic. The ricocheting particles are dielectric, and when they spin each other, when that hits the torus and spins the outer cloud, you got magnetic and dielectric that make electromagnetism, i.e., an electron, and you get power. We can harvest this sort of 2-part reaction to the magnetic getting hit by the dielectric, and you get electromagnetism. It's all beautifully physical in your brain. So if someone's trying to tell you a bunch of crap about what electricity is, when you have a magnet, you actually are moving ether. Remember the old trick where you put a magnet on the table and you put a piece of paper and some shavings and then you move it around? There's that old sort of Etch-a-Sketch thing where they had shavings but had a little magnetic wand, and you can get it for $2 at the convenience store, and you move around all the little ashes, and you draw a little picture. You are moving fibers of magnetic dust into place using a magnet, and the entire thing is nothing more than an ethereal drawing kit. You get that, right? So when anyone ever describes to you having a 0-point energy system, you just need to understand there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, which is a horrible phrase, but they have figured out a source of stimulant. For the Coral Castle guy, he had the wheel in his garage, right? In his little hut up there. Never paid for power the entire time he was alive. Once he moved to Florida, he never paid for power again. All right? Again, when they asked him how he built Coral Castle, he says, I figured out how he built the pyramids, and you need to figure out the rest, right? I think he understood, what was it called, Shadow Valley or whatever it was, which was Peaceful Valley in the Twilight Zone, where they were gifted technology by an alien or somebody. And they basically said, we can't share this with the rest of the world because they'll create weapons out of it. I think that guy in Coral Castle pretty much thought the same thing, or he knew that they already knew. But what he did was he used cement, and he pushed in hundreds of magnets, big giant magnets, but every single one he flipped the other way. But he used cement to hold them in place. I don't even know how he built that wheel. I would love to see how he did it. Some guy on YouTube, like I said, he's already built that wheel. But by doing that, he has a bunch of magnets that are already arguing with each other. And as magnets argue with each other, remember when you put 2 magnets, you can figure out which ones are exactly the same polarity, positive and negative, if they fight. If you have 2 positives or 2 negatives, they're going to fight. But you flip one around, positive and negative, they clink together, don't they? They draw together. And there's magnets out there that YouTube people make videos with that are utterly dangerous. They're so magnetized that if their hand is in the way, it will go through their hand like soup. All right? So now imagine, just as an experiment in a laboratory, you could use magnets and wires, and boy, you're going to get a lot of power because you're going to be stimulating the ethereal currents around that wire, which is conductive, copper wire, what have you, which is what the Coral Castle guy used. And suddenly you can have power in the room. You can light a light bulb without paying for it. And it's infinite, right? Again, the Mark Twain guy, he would always visit Nikola Tesla's laboratory in New York. He said, man, this guy's whole room is lit. All of his machines are on, but none of them have wires. This was not a trivial mind making a comment about a trivial man. What Nikola Tesla did was he figured out induction. He figured out how to power things from a distance. You may not know it, but induction is used in a bunch of equipment that you use already. What is induction? It's 2 wires that aren't attached to each other. They're 2 coils that run parallel to each other. And because one coil has a stimulation of ethereal currents around it, it actually stimulates the other coil and gives power to the other coil. It's usually inside of a little box, so you can't really tell what's going on. They simply don't want you to figure out what's amazing. What's amazing about 30-year electricians or electrical engineers, I've sat with them. I've talked to them about cathode theory, anode theory. Cathode is the way that everything works, negative to positive, but they're taught to go anode, positive to negative. And I'll tell them about ether, and they should have everything that they need to see ether immediately. They may not have been taught it, but I had one guy, look at me and say, "Oh, I don't think that really matters. I don't think that's really the way it works." Denying all the fundamental theories of what makes an electron actually occur. Phenomenal. Getting hydrogen out of tap water is not a big deal. Go see Stan Meyer's videos, right? Go watch my video on Stan Meyer's, okay? But there's a bunch of ways to do it. There's a bunch of ways to do it. There are some theoretical ways of doing it, which the government might have figured out, which is to create elements that don't exactly exist in the periodic table, okay? They might have to be synthesized, and they actually are a magnet on crack. That's probably the best way to talk about it. And when you have something that absolutely disturbs the actual fabric of the universe, when ether hits this element, it goes crazy. But it goes crazy in a way that if you actually create wafers of this particular element and cut it and mount it and shape it, it's like a railgun of electrons without any power bill, without any source of power except this object. Have any of you seen the videos online where they take a copper wire that's coiled and they attach it to itself like a snake eating its tail, and they coil it at the exact diameter of a AAA battery or a AA battery. They put the AA battery inside the coil and it goes around like a little train inside there. No one's paying the power company for that battery to react to that copper wire. You are seeing ether do what it does. This stuff has AETHER, just so you know. It's not like Ethernet, which doesn't have the A on it. This was deprecated out of science by the Michelson experiment by the moron fraud known as Einstein. Remember, E equals MC squared. The fundamentals of that exact equation was filed in the Zurich Patent Office 1 year before Einstein was born. So special relativity and general relativity was harvested out of the Zurich Patent Office because they would not award patents to the individuals who came up with those theories. He took it home to his wife, who went through all the mathematics and gave him enough to get going. And once he grabbed the attention of a bunch of racists, okay, they said, we're going to make this a racial issue, and you're going to be the most racially brilliant guy. And they forged the rest of his career. He's on the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, but could not explain it at any university that he traveled to. Professors who understood the photoelectric effect would go listen to him lecture and say, it doesn't sound like this guy even knows what he's a part of. They barnacled his name onto the Nobel Prize so they could win, knowing that he was a complete facade, just like Peter Sellers in the movie Being There. The movie Being There is all about Einstein. It's the inside joke. Now, something supernatural happens at the end of that movie, but that's just a little thing at the end to kind of try to subtract out anyone who ever latched on and figured out who they were actually talking about. An abject moron running around pretending to be the smartest person in the world. Hence, his famous picture of sticking his tongue out. He knew he was a fraud. He also married his first cousin, divorced his wife, beat his wife. He's a piece of shit. Sorry. So 0-point energy systems? Oh yeah, baby. They've got them. Once they figured out and reintroduced into the top echelon of, say, Los Alamos Labs, which would probably feed the fundamental understanding back to something like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they do a bunch of skunk work stuff. Who knows, Caltech, a bunch of like secret places. When they stopped engaging traditional electrical generation through nuclear power plants, coal plants, and they realized that I don't think they ever lost this technology, quite frankly. They kept on Tesla's coattails, right? And realized that the Earth is made of electricity. It's an infinite power source. But they wanted it mobile. They wanted it inside their fake UAPs, right? They're real objects, right? But the Tic Tac and the gimbal, that's naval engineering, okay? They have figured that out, and they have put it inside these containers, and they flew them around all over the place. And who knows if any of the claims of that stuff is real. You got the most horrible black and white sort of Call of Duty videos of these things when you have a plane that's worth $40 million with, believe me, 4K cameras on them. I mean, come on. A $40 million plane doesn't have a camera as good as an iPhone? Give me a break. You never saw any zoomed up photographs of this thing moving. There's a few color supposed things, but it's something that a college student or a high school student or a junior high school student could do with a free product like Blender, which I use to create the intro of the show, in minutes, right? They just have to have some video of a vehicle flying over the ocean. That's all they have to have. Inserting the Tic Tac in there, the gimbal, easy peasy. I mean, minutes, not hours. If you couldn't get it done in half an hour, I don't think you should be able to get a accredited class, a 3-credit class, because it's so simple, all right? Now, did they use a bunch of crazy technology in the past, in the 50s, 40s, and 50s? They gave people radiation burns, cancer, and it ended up at a few fatalities. I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't put it past them. Once you get a bad idea in your mind, the military or other scientific communities will take it to the absolute maximum apex to figure out what its threshold is, like spinning mercury inside of a torus, a donut, right? Once you spin mercury, what's interesting about mercury is it a solid or a liquid? It's actually a liquid, which actually technically means it's a gas. And it's made of metal. So when you spin it, you actually start interacting with the ether in the area, which is all over the place, and it starts bouncing off this stuff. And you get a stimulant, right? If you spin a liquid metal and then you know the dielectric is coming in on this stuff and it's already magnetic, you're going to get an electromagnetic valence on the outside of this thing, just like a coat, like it's wearing a little paint job, right? And that paint job is electrical. But it's a lot of effort to create electrons. Why do that? Something's got to spin it. You got to hold it. How much how much mercury would it take to create a current that would actually create flight? I mean, it's a horrible algorithm, which is why they told a good friend of mine that by 1996, they were done with that technology. They were absolutely done ever using mercury as a stimulant to the ethereal fields of the entire universe to create and trap and capture and control energy. They had moved on to something else. All right, enough of that. Next up, I want to touch on Project Looking Glass. Now, Project Looking Glass was hatched out of that letter movement online. We've talked about it a couple times. The ludicrous assertion was that it was a time travel aperture of some kind. The Vatican has a time travel window through it. You need to look at the show produced by J.J. Abrams called Fringe, where they actually have that actual invention in there. And there's also movies in the late 60s that have these windows that can look back in time. It's an old, tired science fiction story. Nothing wrong with it for science fiction assertion, but that's where these PSYOP people get these ideas, just so that you know. If you want to know what Project Looking Glass really is, I assure you, you just need to watch a show called Person of Interest. It ran 5 seasons. 4 seasons were full 4 seasons, and the 5th season ends in episode 13. It is about a gentleman who created an AI to track and predict everyone's sort of intentions, and it would figure out who was a bad guy and who was a good guy, and it would bubble up targets of interest, what they call relevant targets, to agencies that would go and investigate, potentially take these people out. You could be a victim, you could be a perpetrator, and they would do the business at the intelligence level based on the software, which probably does exist, right? But the show is based on the fact that he realized that what they call irrelevant targets were people that were going to get hurt by other people, just normal people. They weren't part of, clandestine groups against governments. And so this character played by Michael Erickson, who's in the new Fallout series who gets his head cut off, unfortunately, was opposite of Jim Caviezel, who played Christ in Mel Gibson's movie. He was a really good guy. It's a genius. He hires Jim, who's like playing a homeless guy who's an ex-operative for the CIA in general. He ends up becoming the muscle so that when these numbers come from the computer, which has already been sold to the government, it comes to a telephone, and I won't spoil it for you, but the telephone actually tells them who the perp is. Either it's the victim or the perp, right? The Vic. And Jim goes and saves their lives. Well, it blows up beyond that, right? But the amount of surveillance technology in this series, which is made by Jonathan Nolan, the guy you can trust with all your entertainment bucks, who made Westworld, and J.J. Abrams, who also did Fringe. They made the show together, and it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of writing. It's fun. It's got a suspension of disbelief, and that the good guy usually just miraculously pulls it off. But there's some pretty gnarly scenes in there as well. The spins, the twists, the evolution of the technology, the cliffhangers are worth every penny. You can get on Amazon. I think you have to buy season 2 and 3. Whatever it was, I bought it, and it was probably some of the most entertaining television I've ever seen in my life. But in that, you will see an absolute genetic breakdown of what Project Looking Glass most likely is if it exists, which is a massive AI that is taking in all of your social media data, because you can't get off social media. You can't delete your Facebook. You can't delete your Instagram, your TikTok account. You are addicted to giving away all of your matrix and all of your data so that you become more compromised as a human being. They got you by the short hairs. And you are in the system because they know what you do. For those of us that use credit cards or electronic means of paying for what we buy, they know everything that you ingest, where you are physically, because our telephones have a GPS on them, because we can't be anywhere in the world without our cell phones, right? Something to think about when we come up with the next 4 years of change here. You may want to get rid of your social media, move it off to a personal website. You may want to leave your phone at home and simply say, I wasn't available, right? Getting out of their grid is the easiest thing in the world to technically do, but it's the hardest thing to do mentally, which is sort of a joke. We're jokes, basically, of ourselves, right? But I think Project Looking Glass was nothing more than an AI. That's it. And to the degree we contribute is to the degree it is accurate in determining how to find us, how to frame us, all these poor patsies that are blamed for these FFs in the world. It's a sad situation that we're basically killing ourselves and implicating ourselves and getting ourselves in blackmailed situations, potentially, because we use all these devices. And what's actually the only silver lining to it is all the bad people in the world most definitely have to use these means to communicate, whether they hide inside of a video game on their phone, using chat or various other means. They always get caught, right? People who engage in human trafficking and other means of viewing photos or imagery of things they're not supposed to see, they're getting it through the net, and so they're obviously capable of being caught. But time travel. Let's go to time travel real quick. It's been an ongoing conspiracy, and I will tell you that I'm definitely one of the individuals who watches Twilight Zones, which has a lot of time travel episodes in it, either inadvertently or intentionally. And I'll tell you what the game is. And you may either nod your head or you will go into fight or flight hearing me say this. You're either so in love with the idea of time travel that you won't let go of it, or you understand that time is nothing more than an illusion created by the history that is stored in the database that is our brain, i.e. potentially the universe itself. Time travel is a wish to go back to a previous state of the entire universe. That somehow there's a path to go backwards. I assure you, if the only way that you could ever go backwards is if you are truly inside of some sort of computer simulation and the gods or God that runs the simulation that you're in is willing to insert you backwards in time. That's the only way that time travel exists. There's absolutely not a single theory, and I'm going to repeat this, there's not a single theory that any person who wants time travel to be real, who understands all the mathematics of cosmology, subatomic physics, has ever found to send something back in time. There simply isn't. If you're hearing someone say that, they're most likely feeding you something that is a fraud. But they know you want it. They know you want it so bad because you want to go back in time so bad. And what's interesting about the psyche of going back in time, and we all suffer from it, and if you really listen to Rod Serling's intros and outros to the episodes that have time travel, one of them is about a gentleman who goes back to his hometown accidentally. He basically stops to get gas. His car needs to be serviced, so he walks to his hometown, which is a mile away. Oddly, he acts like he doesn't know where he is, which is kind of funny. Trust me, I would never be 1 mile outside my hometown and not know my hometown's in that direction. But he goes into the hometown, he goes into the diner, and he orders a soda. He goes into some, soda shop. He orders a 3-scoop ice cream, realizes it's still a dime, and he's like, well, that's weird. You're going to go out of business if you're not charging the right amount. But what he does is he goes outside, and it's Ron Howard's very first role as a little kid. And he realizes through talking to people and seeing things, he's 20 years in the past. Easily 20 years in the past, maybe even more. But he's a little 12-year-old kid carving his name in the side of a post in a gazebo. Rod's narration at the beginning and end of that episode really talks about the fact that we get to a point where life is starting to fizzle out, right? Everything that you could idealistically hang on to as a young person has basically been lived or not lived, You're no longer a spring chicken. And so the only way you could possibly enjoy the notion of that open world where anything's possible is to envision a time travel element where you regain your physical youth and relive things. And the ending of the episode is beautiful. I won't ruin it for you, but he basically is educated by his father of what the real deal is. But listen to Rod Serling's words more than anything, because it will give you sort of a platform to deal with the fact that we are a very temporary vessel known as human being. Our soul is not a part of that ecosystem. Your soul, if you want to be a scientist, is part of the conservation of energy algorithm. It doesn't dissipate into a dust, right? We know babies are born that are old. You can just look in their face. They learn things faster and they're more intense, like the musician Prince. The guy just, by the age of 14, he's performing with his own band downtown in the city of Minneapolis with the band, and he's essentially better than most professionals at the age of 14. He'd been here before. He had played those instruments before. Something happened. Potentially Nikola Tesla himself had been working on theories that led up to his understanding of ether, i.e. electromagnetism. Who knows? And there's evidence, again, that we had electromagnetism figured out 40,000 BC. If you look at the Egyptians who seem to use electricity to build pyramids because you can't get light inside of a deep crevice with mirrors. It doesn't work. Doesn't matter if it's sunny outside, okay? You cannot see after 4 turns of a mirror. There's no evidence they actually even had any mirrors at that time, right? The bummer when you really realize that time is an illusion, lunchtime doubly so, as Douglas Adams said, is that you have to live now to the fullest. There's always something new, but if one starts to live in the past inside their mind, it's okay to go back and enjoy the past in your mind, enjoy memories of things. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It doesn't disable you in any way, shape, or form, but it needs to be the minority of your thoughts so that you can deal with today. There's always something you can do today, as long as you don't drink your brain away or use too many drugs. You could be injured, handicapped, doesn't matter. There's something else you can do. Trust me, I got a friend of mine from high school. He's a quadriplegic. He wrote a book that's still one of the best sellers out there. He travels the entire United States giving kids speeches in a wheelchair. He's got one of the most beautiful, loving wives I've ever seen anyone ever capture. And so in a lot of ways, he's lived a better life than us. And when he was 18 years old, he jumped off a boat and didn't realize it was a bunch of rocks 2 or 3 feet down and broke his neck. He just didn't concede to that injury. Okay, time to change the subject. Let's go into the existence of aliens. We're getting a lot of disinfo about UFOs and aliens right now, and it's starting to get pathetic because the individuals who think they're really good at telling lies. Why is it that people that aren't good at telling lies think they're really good at telling lies? It's weird. It's really, really strange. I mean, every telltale sign that would mean someone's full of crap. And these interviews are all loaded. You know, they only get these softball questions, or they get a massively complex question and the guy's like, well, it's funny you should ask me that. I've already thought about the answer, right? Religion is the number one reason why people fall away from God. George Carlin, he hated religion. George Carlin hated humanity. It was one of the listeners came to me on, I think, BitChute and said, why are you mentioning him ever? He was one of the most sociopathic people, or pathologically bizarre people on planet Earth. And he gave me a video that was cut together on BitChute, and he was right. I was raised with, Richard Pryor and George Carlin as two massive influences in my life. And because they were influential, I was also raised on Steve Martin, but he wasn't like trying to change my mind about anything, right? George Carlin was, as I understand it, and through a lot of his personal interviews, he was raised in a Catholic church, and he got the bum part of it all. He may not want to admit it, but maybe he got molested or something. I don't know. But he hated the Catholic Church more than he hated anything else in the entire world. And so he dedicated a giant portion of his career to lambasting anyone who believed in a God. Well, there's a connection there with aliens, in my opinion. Of all the information you've ever ingested about aliens, how much of it's Hollywood? Which stands for television and movies. How much of it is Hollywood? Comic books, whatever. I would wager 98%, 99% is all fictional stuff telling you who these folks are and what their objectives are, what they look like, how they get here, where they live, and all that stuff. It's all fictional. Same thing with a religion and God. Poor God has to take the hit for religion. Something that in most cases, was man-made, 100%. And it's not made by people who are trying to disrespect God in any way, shape, or form. The Romans wrote a lot of the New Testament, hence the phrase, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. That is not Jesus Christ talking to you. That is not God talking to you. I assure you, if either one of those entities existed or exists today, that's the last thing they would ever tell you. Okay? So when you think about aliens, the problem is that the opinions are usually formed out of a tapestry of fiction. If someone saw a movie recently and aliens were bad, but they portrayed themselves as good, like V back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was a bunch of people acted human, but underneath they were reptilian and they were going to devour Earth and all these other stories that you hear, raping all of our minerals and that kind of stuff. You have to understand, stealing our minerals, which is the Planet X theme, it goes back to the 40s when they were talking about aliens in movies. Well, you know what they want, man? They want all of our material, all of our minerals. That's an ancient Hollywood arc in a movie. You just haven't watched enough movies yet if you think that that's a new idea. So, what would an alien mean to the universe in general? Who would have created an alien in the first place? If you believe you're divinely created, well, then they're divinely created. Does it mean that they absolutely love you? No, not by no means is that what that means, right? But a lot of factions in the, fictional world, people selling books, t-shirts, and that kind of crap, or Telegram channels, or YouTube channels, they're really pushing the narrative that, aliens are superior to the level that they've lacked any sort of empathy. They come and they abduct us and they probe us and they injure us in all these different ways. But somehow when we come home, we're perfectly undetectably injured, right? It's one of these things of like, okay, if you were Whitley Strieber, who said, Whitley Strieber probably has a little side practice in his personal life where his anal cavity gets, brutalized. And so what he did was he created a fictional cover story. It's aliens, man. It ain't the guy down the street doing it to me. It's not the Craigslist, personals that I'm addicted to doing it to me. It's aliens doing it to me. And it's like, okay, if you were probed by an alien and I'm just going to say it in this anal way that Whitley Strieber started and a bunch of people jumped on, you should be able to go to a proctologist and say, right there is where it hurts. And they should be able to go in there and just like a forensics experiment on a bullet test, right? A ballistics test, right? Barrels of guns are scored so that we can find out which gun shot which bullet, right? Well, you'd find some pretty mechanical things going on inside that guy's cavity. Not so much though, right? It's just like the flat earth thing. You think you have to get to the South Pole to prove that the sun doesn't do a 24-hour cycle. Go to South America, look at the cams online. You can stay in Toledo, Ohio and prove to yourself it's either flat or round, right? You mean to tell me that none of the rich people in the world have bought a ticket down there? You don't think one guy in the whole world, some NBA guy that got paid $400 million in the last year or over 10 years or whatever it is, didn't want to go down there and find out? Well, how much time would he have to spend down there to figure it out? Oh, I don't know, 48 hours, and he'd have a double check. At some point, we have to regain control of our own body and our own mind and our own soul by taking some of these conspiracies that we believe and pushing them out the door where they belong. So an alien existing and all the fiction that's been put on top of them is very similar to God existing and all the churches putting shit on the top of God. Right? It shouldn't negate your belief in God if you found a religion that you didn't like. If you're molested by a preacher, it doesn't have anything to do with God. You might blame God for that situation to occur. But once you figure out you're reincarnated infinitely to your choosing, right? I want to go back down. Okay, you can go back down now. Where do you want to be? 1958. What do you want to do? Well, tell me about history. That sounds pretty good right there. Okay, so you go down. Maybe you roll the dice and you simply say, look, I've controlled the last 500 times I went down to Earth, and I realized that by me trying to control where I went inside the timeline of man, I didn't really have a really genuine experience. It's like the Twilight Zone where the guy thought he went to heaven, but he actually went to hell because he could get everything that he wanted. And he said, that's no fun. He says, what kind of heaven is this, man? And the guy laughs in his face and says, whoever said you went to heaven, bro? You're in the other place. And us dictating to the universe or God or the simulator controllers, which has obviously got a boss called God on top, you're not getting the full randomness. And so you simply go, yeah, put me wherever you like. Whatever gender, whatever. Put me wherever you like. And you end up in some slum somewhere. You end up getting human trafficked and you're gone at 2.5 years old. That's true randomness, and that's something that a being that exists forever would appreciate. I know it sounds crazy, but you don't live in that realm to appreciate that realm, right? I do believe there's something out there. People who take DMT, they see aliens. They, again, like I said, though, a lot of them say they see the same exact alien. Whoever attaches to you after you take DMT stays with you your entire life. And I'll just repeat, one of my friends, a brilliant guy who, super handsome, super rich, super brilliant, video game god, doesn't need to tell anybody a fake story to get attention. This guy walks in the room and is worshipped. He doesn't have any egotistical fiber in his body. He told me after about 10 times of taking DMT, the alien that always is with him, which is what he says is shaped like a gray, but it's black. He said it was my guide for 9 times, and at the 10th time, he put his forehead against my forehead, so I had to look into his eyes, and he simply said, you need to stop coming here. You belong where you live. Stop coming here. And specifically, the alien said to him, this is our realm, not your realm. You were welcome to visit, but now you're pushing it. And my buddy said, I never wanted to be home more than that moment in my life. And this is not a weak dude. This is a physically formidable guy. He's not a nerd, even though he's one of the most brilliant technical guys I've ever met in my life. And, he worked on cannons that were built into missile silos that use plasma to shoot space with this crazy mechanism that he helped design, basically. And when he asked everyone, he goes, what the hell is this thing for? I mean, I know what we're doing. We flood the center chamber with plasma and we light it up and it blasts this gigantic laser into space. And they basically said, we're defending ourselves against them. He says, what the hell does this mean, right? And they said, well, them. The people aren't human beings, Woo. And this guy, again, he's not a tall tale guy. He almost told me in a way that he told me the story to my face at a pool, at a party, with a bunch of other amazing people at the party. And he was almost looking at me like, you're going to think I'm nuts. We just met, but, we got this mutual friend who we both respect. He and I are still friends to this day. And I have my own experience. I have at least one experience that I believe is 100% real. And I think most of you heard it, but it's just basically, it was around Christmas time, and I woke up at the age of 21 years old, and I got a gray in front of me. And I'm in the middle of a conversation, and he says to me, "You're going to be all right." He puts his little hand on my shoulder right here. And me sitting down is about his height, right? And I said, "I don't know." I said, "No one's going to believe me." And he said, "What would make them believe?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And he reaches between my legs and grabs a gift that I thought for sure was an LP because it was square and flat. And he goes, "If I told you what was in this present, would they believe you?" I said, "I guess." And he says, "It's origami paper." I'd never seen origami paper in my life. I would have died if someone put a gun to my head and said, "What shape was origami paper?" I would have said, "Well, 8 by 11. Nope, it's square. It's wild, man. I've got another one, but I'm going to chalk that one up to a dream, even though the amount of touch and feeling I had in the second experience was as real as you and I shaking hands, man. It was crazy. But I'll leave the other one to a dream. But yeah, I believe they exist. Do I think they're flying TikToks and gimbals? 100% no. 100% no. But does that negate them? No. Do I think they're evil? Hell no. It's like, just do basic math, man. If they got the ability to do what they do, get into our homes at night without any detection of any kind, without leaving a single trace behind, if they can get from wherever the hell they live to where I live, whether it be interdimensional or traveling across the stars, screwing up the planet Earth would be pretty much a super easy thing to do. And anything with upper intelligence gains the definition of empathy. They just simply do. They don't lose empathy. That's what Hollywood wants you to think. Well, they experiment on you like the great movie Cowboys and Aliens. If you haven't seen that movie, you're in for a treat. But those aliens in that movie were very, scientific and didn't really care about hurting you. That's what Hollywood puts out. Fear anything that is not the global elite who already control you, right? Now let's just dive into one of the most coveted subjects on this channel, which is space programs. Are we starting to develop the technology required to get to the moon, get to Mars, all this other stuff? Well, if we are, I've got a theory, okay? Just like Monty Python and the Brontosaurus, right? If there is any technology out there to get to the moon or to Mars, you and I have not seen this technology ever demonstrated. Unless the Tic Tac and gimbal footage is actually real of, a UAP, which is the Navy creating these objects through skunk works. Okay, so if you got some anti-gravity, sure. But you have to get them through the Van Allen belts. You have to get them through solar radiation. And you have to find a way to generate so much disturbance in the ethereal model of the universe, meaning that super chaotic cloud out there, you have to create such an electromagnetic field around the vehicle, which is going to probably, let's say the Tic Tac was, keep it easy, it's 10 feet long and 4 feet in its capsule shape size, right? If you're going to fly that thing into the vacuum of space, which is not a vacuum, it's just absolutely densely packed with free particles of ether, because they are so free and so chaotic, you need to unify their movement like a liquid crystal display inside of a digital watch back in the day, right? If you didn't stimulate the number shape in the liquid crystal, you saw a cloud because the little fibers are swimming inside the liquid crystal. But once you actually magnetize them with an electrical current, you could see the pattern written on the bottom of the watch, which was the digital numbers that you saw. So if you had this 10 by 4 shape, right, and you need to travel into deep space, supposedly to the moon and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to wager that the amount of ether you're going to need to control is probably on at least the order of like 10 times the size of that vehicle is going to have to be disturbed to create not only flight, but control, because you're going to create a gravity well. You're going to push ether out of the way. The vehicle is going to fall into that, which is how it's moving around the earth, if those things are truly real. But we have a lot of dense atmosphere in this realm that we're in, right? It's the infinitely thin layer of atmosphere, but to a little tiny 10 foot by 4 foot object, it's just as dense as soup at sea level, right? But you move that into the chaotic, vacuum of space, which is basically saying the ether that is out there is not something that you can necessarily interact with because it hasn't slowed down to become oxygen molecules and hydrogen molecules, right? To talk to them, right? You're going to have to create a significant amount of electricity around that vehicle to control it. Now, you could hurl them into space using this technology and basically use the atmosphere as it's sort of like asphalt underneath the drag race tire, right? So you're using this algorithm to create a gravity well in front of the vehicle. It falls into the hole, and then it just absolutely thrusts out into the universe, and it might be going, 200,000 or 300,000 miles an hour, which is pretty quick for anything that we've created, but in accordance to what we think about how big the universe is, subtract everything else you've seen through magazines that tell you the galaxies are out there waiting for you, you might be in for a really intense journey. Getting back a message once you're in deep space is sort of ludicrous. We know that on Earth, with tremendous amounts of power going through cell phone towers, all around Los Angeles, where there are rich neighborhoods, you can't get cell phone reception because rich people don't want that crap by their house. But, Nixon could do a phone call with astronauts on the moon without any delay. How you doing, guys? Doing great. How are you? That's awesome. How's the moon? Oh, it's pretty crazy. It's all ashy, and, we learned that these meteorite impacts are actually volcanic bubbles, and, we're actually sinking into the surface of the moon because it's not actually a surface of the moon, et cetera, right? But to make you think that they've got rovers on Mars that could talk back to Earth within 18 minutes, I mean, what a joke. What kind of antenna do you think you would have to create and mail to Mars to send a message back from Mars to Earth? It's all asinine theories that just get blown off by people that don't know anything about science. Remember when radio waves were first introduced, let's just say in massive scale in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, you had New York communicating with Kansas, a 1,100-mile trip of broadcasting. The wattage coming out of those freaking radio stations was phenomenal, 60,000 watt. They would announce this as part of the station identification. It was a bragging right to say how much wattage they were broadcasting over America so you could get this radio station. But when you go to Mars, right, which, in the closest distance it has for landing to it, which is every couple of years, it's 130 million miles away. Something like that, right? And then when it's the furthest away, it's on the other side of the sun. I mean, you're talking, deep 750 million miles away, but it's no problem. Let me turn on this AA battery radio and I'm going to talk to Earth. No problemo. SpaceX is obviously supplanting NASA in a huge way. They move their launch bases out of America so that no human beings actually see all this miraculous stuff that's most likely generated through CG. It's funny because Elon has joked several times. It has to be CG so it looks real, he says, right? And everyone's like, hee hee ha ha, because that's not CG. And then you watch something like Pacific Rim, which is, robots swimming in the ocean, having battles on ports, and all the Michael Bay movies with the Transformers. And you're seeing the most miraculous, almost inconceivably complex robots, especially with the Transformers movies, where there's more moving parts than the human mind can conceive of in these robots. I mean, whoever modeled these robots, they should get an Oscar all by themselves, right? So when you see the meager boosters and what have you, and the fire trails and all the stuff from SpaceX launches, which has this absolutely vomitous soundtrack of a bunch of morons, yay, it's all like a bunch of millennials clapping their hands to it, and Gen Xers, you're like, okay, you only inserted that soundtrack like a sitcom that sucks, putting a laugh track in because no one would organically laugh to it. And what they understand about a sitcom that sucks, when they put a laughing track in it, they know that laughing itself is a contagion. So you might Pavlovianly attach a better review to a shitty sitcom because they have told you to laugh. And you're saying in your mind subconsciously and tell a vision, this is a funny show because hear all that laughter. And they've got laughter down to the point there's no repeats or what have you. Sometimes a laugh is so funny, you just laugh at the laugh, right? So when you have all these SpaceX launches and other agencies that are putting out basically tried and true ancient rockets that were perfected by the French in the 80s, right? Which is really what the Falcon 9 platform looks like. Sure, we've increased boosters. I see them fly over California and they blow off their boosters and a bunch of morons film it and go, man, there's a UFO up there, man. Yeah, sure is, Jethro. Yep. But all the miraculous crap happens south of the border. And, they've had explosions and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, okay, until Elon Musk sends me a ticket to come to a launch where I can see that, Starship booster land and get grabbed, and it's not on television, I can actually see it with my own eyes. Until I see that, I'm going to pretty much think that that's all crap. And I know the CG is great, and it really convinces you. It almost tears at your soul. I got buddies of mine with massive CG backgrounds texting me after SpaceX launch, and they're going, man, it's starting to look really real. Previously, they were like, oh, yeah, I could totally tell this is CG. That's how good they're getting, right? But the goal is not that much. Look at all the CG movies you've seen, right? When Death Stars shoot fucking lasers across the universe and you're like, wow, that looks real. You're like, yeah, those dinosaurs look real too. And all that other stuff, the alien looks real. And now all of a sudden you just have a cylinder with some boosters on the bottom and you got to have a few FBX files to create the flames off of it. Whoop-de-doo. Whoop-de-doo, right? The Roadster was not deployed in orbit around Earth, right? The whole car would have exploded the second it hit the vacuum of space because tires are inflated and there's no pressure in space. Even in the Ethereal model, those tires would have blown up. The dashboard would have flexed completely out of control. The whole car is plastic, right? Remember what NASA said? In the shadows, it's negative 280. In the sunlight, it's positive 280. So you have a dashboard that's got a 500-degree swing in the plastic. Ask anybody who lives in Arizona in America, what happens to your dashboard? If you don't put that little visor in the window, right? What happens to your dashboard? It splits down the middle eventually. Every single dashboard in Kansas, man, after about 10 years, it slices right down the middle. Like an earthquake hit it, right? Okay, next subject. Let's do Tartaria. The Tartarians. Mud floods. It's all attached to itself, right? Well, in terms of a society called the Tartarians, I think that, unless people are creating AI-generated books, AI-generated maps, well, there seems to be some evidence that there was a culture called Tartarians. But let me make sure you understand. The difference between identifying a society that existed, called the Tartarians, and associating them with all this miraculous architecture and technical advancement when all of Europe has the ethereal cathedrals, the ethereal power generators on top with the steeples with the little balls on them that absolutely drive ethereal power down inside the building so it could have light without a power station. Well, that's everywhere. That's everywhere. Whether or not you need to blame it on the Tartarians, I don't know. Yeah, do it if you want to. You don't have to. Now, for those of you not following this, well, there's a lot of people that are realizing that architecture in the world has a sort of common denominator, and that is when you build a bunch of buildings in the universe. When you build a bunch of buildings throughout history, depending on how the sedimentary rock in your particular area goes, they will build on top of those buildings. Like in California, especially in the Bay Area where you have a lot of swampland, Redwood Shores is part of Redwood City. Redwood Shores is swampland. When they rated it for its stability during an earthquake, 7 or above, it's marked black because the actual water that's underneath that land will absolutely come up, and you'll be 3 to 10 feet underwater if there's a 7.5 earthquake or more, okay? So in order to stabilize anything they build, because they built a bunch of skyscrapers, it's exactly where the Oracle Towers are from Oracle, the database company, they have to legally pound into the ground, pile drive into the ground. Every story they're going to build up, they have to pound that in the ground. So if they have a 2-story building, they got to push 2 stories down of these big giant girders down there to hang on to the soil, so that when this giant earthquake happens, they're above water, basically, and it doesn't fall over. So the Oracle Towers, I think, must be about 25 stories, somewhere in there. So that means they had to pile drive into the ground 25 stories of girders into the ground, okay? Well, that was a natural thing that just came out of building on top of the previous structure all over Europe and England. You know that when England wants to build a brand new store and they knock down the building that was there, they find underneath ancient architecture. Greece, the Parthenon, that entire mountainside is just a big bunch of crazy architecture that goes down. Egypt itself, again, we don't know how far it goes down, but right around the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx, Brian Forrester has basically been told that there might be, well, he says that, look, underneath is like several stories of actual structures, but one story wasn't 10 feet like the modern age. One story could be 30 feet. And so if somebody says there's, 27 stories down, you have to multiply that times anywhere from 25 to maybe 40 feet per story, because it's all custom, right? Well, that would mean that the Egyptians had dug down into the ground potentially almost a mile, right? Who knows? We're not allowed to go down and take a look, are we? So, in history, they are constantly finding, including the Capitol building and a bunch of other things, that when they look at old pictures of architecture, there seems to be another architecture underneath that architecture. Venice obviously wasn't underwater the entire time it existed. So there's obviously, a bunch of stuff underneath it. Paris has a bunch of stuff underneath where man has existed for potentially 5,000 years. Well, a lot of architecture builds on top of other architecture. And so the theory that comes with Tartarian theory in some people's camps is that, gods created the flood of 40 days and 40 nights, and they flooded the entire world with mud, covering up the old architecture, thus providing a new blank slate to the canvas of which you could build on top of. Now, in architectural theory, that doesn't make any sense. Even if you put mud on top of another building, you still have to pile drive down. I mean, you'd have to know where the other building was to use it as kind of a stilt to hold up the other building, right? In America, we have a lot of like rural mining towns and stuff that did this, and you'll have a building that was built, and then on one side, it was actually level at one point, but on one side, the sedimentary rock came down from the hill and filled up the side of that one part of the building, so it's the first story is completely gone. You can't go out the first story door. It exists inside the building, but you can't use the door. So what they would do is take the second story entryway and put a staircase down and say, if you're going to come in from the south side, that's where the sedimentary rock hit the building. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, and it filled up, and so you have to enter the second story door. This was because a lot of the mining, I guess you could call them colonies, that formed all over America, where they were just going for copper or something in the ground, they didn't pay attention to the fact there was no trees anywhere because it's in the middle of the frickin' desert. And so when it rained, there's no trees in the way to capture a lot of that sedimentary rock. There's no bushes, there's no grass, there's no nothing. And so water and mud just slides down the hill. And if you happen to have a little house there, well, you didn't do your math properly. You didn't understand geology enough. And so sure enough, you're going to get one side of your home and all the homes on that side of the town under soil, right? England, I reported this in one of my Tartarian episodes. In the 1850s, England had never leveled the streets. And so you built a home or you built a business wherever the ground was. And I think it was 1852, they actually put an ordinance down on everybody and said, look, we're leveling London. We have to, basically, we're bringing all the soil up to one level so we can have streets for the first time, right? Because you'd have like a 10-foot drop and then a 10-foot incline. It looked like San Francisco, right? And so they basically told everyone, you have to pay for, personally, whatever it's going to take to level the rock up to whatever the surveyor tells you. So if you need to bring it up 10 feet, you have to pay for that. If you don't pay for that, it's well documented. We're going to do it for you, and we'll give you the bill. And so there's a lot of establishments all over Europe, definitely London, where there's a whole story underneath. 10 feet is a whole story in a modern architectural sense, right? Even if they had 8 foot. Well, now you're 2 feet over. You're into your second level, right? What is the remaining discovery, which is wonderful, and it's a big crescendo of the Gilded Era, is that these buildings were all built with self-generating ethereal-based power systems where they had these giant spikes on top of their buildings with these big spheres inside of them. A lot of them are considered ornamental today, but that will actually capture the wind of ether moving through them. And because they're made of copper, they're made of anything that's conductive, all you got to do is run some leads down into directly what was consuming power inside the building, or some sort of capacitor, like a big giant copper coil or anything that can store that energy until you need to use it. Just don't touch it with your finger until it's been dissipated, right? That, I think, is 100%. Cathedrals being built as echo chambers, and religions having these sort of tonal songs that they sang, right? When you go into a Catholic church, like the ones I grew up in as a kid, we'd always sing like this. That is not music. That's a mathematical tone to bounce off the interior of this church, which would what? Heal you. How many people use the metaphor all the time of going to a church to be healed, right? Well, it might very well have done that. And when they decided they were losing power to the institution itself from, say, a Roman Empire standpoint, then they said, oh, we gotta get rid of these churches, man, because people are following this common law thing, and we need them to hate each other. We need to divide and conquer these people. So let's fragment Christianity into a million slices and purposely create doctrines of religion that compete with each other. The popes over the last 40 years have created versions of the Catholic Church that absolutely, on Monday, something has been blasphemous the entire time the Bible existed. It's okay to do it on Monday. By Friday, it's blasphemous again. Unbelievable that people follow these institutions. Again, God shouldn't have to take the rap for these very human, frail, sociopathic pedophiles who are running around destroying the world with these, viper rooms in the basement of the Vatican. What I find interesting, just as a generic comment, and you'll hear me say this a lot in other shows, is this trend that if it comes through fiction, it suddenly becomes real. And you do understand that, if you're still listening to me right now, I know you understand this. There are agencies and military organizations all around the world in first world countries, and it's starting to bleed into third world countries, of course, where they are creating these gaslighting situations where they tell you so many lies that you think you're going crazy, or they're trying to harvest a group of people. They want the resistance to sign a petition online. That's one of the greatest scams that they've got out there. Sign a petition online, it gives your name and your phone number into the database, and then they can just simply come after you with all the agencies that can come after to ruin your life. It's a bit like when you have a class action lawsuit commercial on TV. I've told you this, guys. I've told you this several times, but those are individuals who are trying, those law firms that are forming the class action lawsuit work for the people that created the problem in the first place. So let's just say an energy company pushed a bunch of toxic whatever chemicals into your water mantle, and your kid's got like 3 arms, right? They put the commercial on TV. They're hired by the energy company, and their whole goal is to lure you into a class action lawsuit where your reward is 0. okay? Where you should be making millions of dollars, you might get at $10,000. Hey, the energy company's like, we'll pay for all the legal fees and everything. We'll put it through a shell company. We'll have one of our executives. We'll fire them, and then they'll go off and do this little gig, and then we'll hire them back as soon as the class action lawsuit sort of kind of gained its momentum and doesn't need that person's leadership anymore. Always sue individually. Always sue individually. If you feel like you've been wronged, right? Let's talk about those trails in the sky, suddenly left by planes, right? Fascinating thing happened on, I think, Friday. This is inauguration day is tomorrow, so it's the 19th right now. So it must have been the 17th. I go outside and the sky is full of real clouds. Real puffy clouds that absorb light and of a very shade of hue, like a gray to them, right? Not a single cloud is shaped like the exhaust of a plane. Isn't that interesting? Wow, miraculously, whatever causes the other thing to happen suddenly disappeared, right? My hope, and I'm not holding my breath, my hope is that the incoming administration in America is going to track down the organizations that do this, which we have very, very concrete evidence that they're using NASA hangars to fill up these planes with this chemical. And it's strategic, man. It's like you might get barium oxide, you might get aluminum oxide, you might get weird nano machines, dropped where you get Morgellons disease. I mean, you might get a bunch of weird stuff. A friend of mine, just so you know, was a bartender around here. She left and she became a agricultural agent for the government. And she said that when they were studying wheat, they were finding these weird dyed chemical little hexagons, macroscopic little hexagons in the wheat. She wasn't a conspiracy person, but she said, wow, we're finding these weird things. Now, what they don't understand is that we ingest that stuff because we don't see it because it's so small, and then it gets hit by radio waves of any kind, any EMF waves, and it's called the piezo effect, and it deforms the metal, and it starts growing into these objects inside of our body. And they know how to latch onto each other and build upper constructs, and then when that starts to happen, these other waves start to tell it what to do with the interior of our body. Grab that cell and destroy it. Grab that DNA and destroy it. Grab this and shred that artery, that vascular system, so they get a bunch of stroke, clots inside their body, right? It's devious. It does exist currently. It has been admitted by every government but ours, but America. The German government admitted it and said it was a weapon for war. The United Arab Emirates did it and flooded Dubai. Cloud seeding is extremely real. It's been around for almost 80 years now. It's been around 80 years now. On our Telegram channel, I posted a video of the Chinese shooting these rockets into the sky, which actually seed clouds with silver, which is something they did in my state of Kansas back in the 40s. I remember the story my grandmother bizarrely had. I mean, talk about my life just being absolutely configured by the Matrix to figure this stuff out. She had this article on the side of her red refrigerator, burgundy refrigerator. There was a bunch of biplanes seeding the clouds with silver. And it was a big thing. And she cut it out and kept it on the side of her refrigerator. This is a 1944-45 article, somewhere in there. I'm seeing this literally 40 years later. Of all the things that she put on a refrigerator and didn't take off her refrigerator, this article was one of them. Isn't that weird? That was programmed into me my whole life. This stuff exists, but if you try to tell people, your NPCs say that it doesn't exist or they don't even know how to respond to you. Very real. In my opinion, extremely real. Again, I've talked to in my radio show before this, my partner went off and talked to a military pilot. I talked to another military pilot and a commercial pilot and a private commercial pilot, or private pilot, I should say. 3 out of 4 used the same exact phrase, and they were not in the same room together. They said, it's not us. It's not us. The private pilot I talked to said, it is easier to report a UFO than seeing these trails come off a plane. Because he used to be a co-pilot for a commercial airline. And in one of his first flights, and he didn't realize these things were real. And I'm asking him all these questions, and he said, it's weird, man. He goes, now that I think about it, he goes, one of my first flights, I looked out the window and I saw another flight cutting a huge trail. And I asked the pilot, who was a guy, he's 30-year vet, and I said, do we make those trails? And the guy looked out the window and said, we don't talk about those. And that's when he said to the other guy, he says, look, you'd be better off reporting a UFO than seeing that stuff. Whoa, right? That stuff's there to poison the earth, knock out the alkaline, through aluminum oxide, knock out the alkaline properties of soil. You breathe it. The only thing I know that will actually stop it from affecting you is time-release vitamin C. I recommend Solera brand. Make sure it's time-release, okay? Nuts. So I want to close with one that is sort of a pet peeve of mine. And it's got a small following online, but it's just unbelievable when you see this kind of stuff. It has to do with expanding Earth, being the way that the Earth actually works. And the anti-expanding Earth folks that believe that dried up volcanoes are old trees, that volcanic discs in the ground like Diamond Head in Hawaii and the big asteroid volcano in Arizona, which I've been to at least 6 times in my lifetime. That's an old volcano. It's just older, so it's smoother, and it's in the desert, so people go, well, that looked like a meteorite, because I saw a Hollywood movie with it, right? The Earth expands 19 centimeters a year, and that was a number that they hid by the year 2000. It expands. It's being injected by ether, and so it's a ball that keeps expanding. And many of you OG people heard me say this 100 times. Again, anytime you see a plateau in Arizona or those plateaus in Utah, you are looking at the old surface of the Earth. Devil's Tower, which is part of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that is the old surface of the Earth, way at the top of Devil's Tower. Why does it look like a tree? Because it's the same book of physics everywhere, right? Why do you see those hexagonal shafts going up? Because the molten lava that was there tempered, and tempered, obviously means the outside dried faster than the inside because it was warmer, and that creates a hexagonal structure. They're all over the world. You see them spilling into the ocean in Europe. Scotland, Ireland, England, they all have these, these hexagonal waves going into the ocean. It's the most gorgeous thing when you see it, when it cracks off all at the same level. You can walk on them, and it's just mysteriously bizarre and mathematical, right? It's the same exact physics that's in the eye of a bee, okay? It's how they actually build honeycombs. They're following the same exact physics that is the natural vibration that they tune themselves to, right? They're not old forests, okay? And that ridiculous theory about, say, Devil's Tower being a tree is that, again, they're trying to lie to you. Let's repeat that. They are lying to you to get you to be interested in something that is a lie. If you had a tree that had the diameter of any one of these structures that they try to tell you is a tree, well, where's the rest of the tree, right? So if you took a big tree in Muir Woods, north of San Francisco, and you cut it off, right? Just to the point, it's just about the proportion of Devil's Tower. Well, how much of the tree goes over that point, and how much of the tree goes down to the earth, just at the earth's surface? Forget the roots, right? Well, one, that whole volcano would have organic roots down in the ground, right? Because that's what it was, supposedly, right? Well, you would have about 90%, if not 95% of that structure would have gone up, which means it would have fallen over, which means that finding that somewhere in the terrain around all these supposed tree volcanoes, right, would be super easy. We would have gigantic tree segments everywhere, all over planet Earth. I mean, massive, gigantic, 100, 200, 300 foot diameter silicone trees. But we don't, do we? Right? Because the story is a lie. And I have nothing but contempt for these people who are running around the web, taking advantage of people with no educations and trying to get these movements going. One, preoccupying your mind with complete crap so you don't focus on something that's perhaps more interesting and has a little more substance to it, right? But just keeping you down. The more that you believe in crap, the more that your brain is basically muffled. It's been pulled down and you're stuck in the worst university on planet Earth. And you make yourself subject to all the ridicule from people that know that you're not paying attention to anything. And a lot of these people are your enemy. They're not your friend. And when they need to harvest you, if they ever win the game for a split second and they can harvest humanity into something where they get to pick and choose who lives and dies, guess who ain't going to make it? People who have been sucking on the lie tit their whole life, right? That's why this show exists, okay? To give you the deeper analysis, to show you logic, and to basically attach it to things that you already know are lies or things that you know that are truth, right? There's some areas we're just not going to know. Unless aliens land like Vulcans and hop out and say, hey, that's us, man, we're Vulcans, man, you know, peace out, bro. You're not going to know they're real. I won't know they're real. God, unless God were to super duper intervene at an extent that could not be denied, right? Something that an intelligence agency using Project Bluebeam could never simulate. Taking them out would be the first thing that God would do, right? He would take the evil souls and go, you're coming with me, and the rest of you are going to live in a really cool world. That would be a pretty good indicator that that's God, not something else, right? But there are things that we can just use our brains a little bit, push our thoughts below a 5-minute video or even a 15-second video, and we can understand it a lot better. You could even know something's a lie and you don't need to know all of the physics behind it and all of the cause and effect models behind it because you saw a smoking gun that basically said, hey, they went to the moon supposedly 6 times and never took a video of Earth. Smoking gun, you're done. It was fake. It was fake. You could even say, oh, they faked a phone call on Apollo 11 to Nixon, but the rest of it was real, right? Don't listen to anyone pitching lies to you without at least encouraging you to take a deeper analysis of stuff, right? I don't know if there'll ever be a need to cover this again in my lifetime, but I'm sure there will be a moment when we need to revisit these things. If more evidence happens to present itself, we'll do individual episodes on some of this stuff. But I wanted to make an entire episode that was just a review of the stuff I see online. I mean, it is unbelievable the amount of unadulterated lying that's going on to create, a bunch of subscriptions on Telegram. I'm going to say something very egotistical sounding, but I will tell you this. I'm waiting to be drastically wrong in any one of my episodes. I mean, again, I tell my friends all the time, you can have your weird opinion of things in your living room, but it's a whole different game to have an opinion in public and have a million people look at your stuff and go, you are so full of it, yada, yada, yada. And, some of you have corrected plenty of my assertions on various episodes, and I absolutely concede to you. You were right about certain things. I either couldn't find the information I needed to think the opposite direction, or you simply knew. And that's wonderful. You've tuned my brain. I will say that much. But when I'm looking at reality today in 2025 and all the things that are basically destroying society as a whole, and I go back 10 years to my episodes and my MK Ultra radio show, it's almost prophetic. I should look like a prophet. I'm saying that with tongue in cheek because I should be that guy. I would hope that I would be wrong about a bunch of these negative things that are out there. But it's some of it's beautiful, and the rediscovery of ether for me, my channel was Eric Dollard, who I don't believe everything he says, but he got me back to studying Faraday to Tesla, and that's all I needed. Looking at the masters who basically discovered electrical engineering. You go back and you can see it, and you apply all the physics from the 21st century, or the 20th century, it all makes sense where the manipulation was, where the economic system said you're going to buy a unit of power and it will not be free. Fun things like aliens and time travel, well, We'll just sit around and see if somebody can do it. We'll see if these little guys ever show up and say, okay, it's time to make contact. You're about to blow your whole self up. And, perhaps they participated in our creation. Who knows, Doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It doesn't mean God vouches for every organized religion on planet Earth. I think they're completely mutually exclusive concepts. 100%. You just have to have the courage to divorce yourself from things that seem mystical. And I have friends of mine that, there's plenty of celebrities as well. And it's, as long as it's for the greater good, you believe in a fictional thing and it makes you a better person because you can't seem to find a way to be a good person without fictional stories around you. Well, hey, if that's your way of being a great person, hey, I'll buy that. I'll take that from you because I don't want you to be a bad person, right? But we should, as grown adults, in my opinion, have the courage to reject things and maintain the overall wisdom from something, right? So there's a lot of organized religion I just simply can't get into. When it's telling you how to be a good person, and hey, man, some of those are just age-old concepts that man's finest hour wrote down on paper. I'll take it every day. I'll live my life according to those rules. But I don't need other things necessarily to be real for me to achieve that beautiful epiphany of, I think, how God, and in the most fundamental definition, would want me to behave in, I certainly hope I certainly hope that we as human beings are supposed to be good and we're not supposed to be the fabric of evil so that people can know good. I'm hoping that those are NPC robots that are simply here to test me and not actual other human beings. That's just a hope of mine. Anyway, hope you dug the show. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please note that if you came in on video, there's audio. If you came in on audio, there's video. If you've never seen a video, there's tons of pictures and stuff and a lot of the more detailed episodes, especially space ones. If you haven't been to the store, I fixed a problem in the store because apparently my printer wanted me to give them a credit card that they actually charged me for your shirt. Then they sell it to Etsy, and then Etsy sells it to you, and the profit model comes off of one of those two. I'm not quite sure how it works. But my card had expired, and I just updated. So I had 2 orders that got bounced, and it was not the fault of the actual purchasing people. Sorry about that. We also have Deep Thoughts Season 1 on a different channel on YouTube. So if you're coming through YouTube exclusively and you want to see the first season, that's a different channel. Go to the website. The website also has top picks, probably about 20 videos we think are fun to watch. And we also have Patreon and PayPal. So if you're coming through that and contributing, thank you so much. Make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you on the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.